can I do? 'Cause I'm just a sinking ship, and you're just a pair of lips that I've lost in the moment. All I want is for you to come back. Now I'm caught in the middle of life, and I need you to survive.
Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, your brother, and your friend Rashid, and I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining us live on this new platform that we're trying to edge away from StreamYard. I just saw Professor David Gibbs in the booth. I just don't see him on the screen again at this moment. So, Professor, if you're here, try to enter the booth again, and I'll click on it because this is new technology, and I'm trying to navigate my way. And I'm just going to be honest with you. When it comes to technology, I'm dumb as a brick. So I'm teaching myself, and my son is teaching me. So if you would use the link again and try to come in, and because I can't see where you are at this moment. But I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me on the most powerful platform for truth, bar none, on God's green earth. This is your platform for education, elevation, and edification. This is the Red Pill Diaries. And today's show is live with Professor David Gibbs. Hopefully he will, let me see if I can bring him in. Let me see if I can, okay. Oh, there we are. Add to stream. Add to stream.
All right, you can see me?
Yes, I can see you now. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, yes. Sorry about that. The problem was on my end, by the way, not on yours.
Okay. I wouldn't know because, as I said before to everybody that's watching, if it's not for my son, if it wasn't for my son, I wouldn't know how to navigate this technology, period. So I want to thank you. I want to take the time out right now to thank you for joining me on my platform. Professor Gibbs, would you give people a little bit of your background before we go further and talk?
Okay. Well, I'm a professor at University of Arizona, a professor of history, although actually my degree is in political science. I published on a lot of different things. I started out as an Africanist. I published on Central Africa for a long time. Then I published in Eastern Europe. I've written a book on Yugoslavia. I've written a lot about Afghanistan over the years, and I just published a book last year on wealth inequality in the United States, on the history of wealth inequality in the United States and the causes of it.
Okay. So since we're on this, and we're seeing the growth in the wealth inequality and the gap, do you believe that the U.S. takes military expenditures too far when they talk about national security, and they forget the man, the woman, the child that's at home, because you cannot have national security if your home is lacking food, water, and shelter, right? I mean, if you're lacking that at home.
This is the classic trade-off you have between guns and butter. And if you spend more on guns, you'll have less to spend on butter. The public, generally speaking, of course, prefers butter. Why would they want guns? But elites in the United States since 1945 have focused very heavily on guns. And it has come out of the pockets of ordinary people to a significant degree, and in a lot of different ways. First of all, there's, of course, just the issue that there'll be less money to spend on social programs, things like education, healthcare, and the like, if you spend it on overseas bases, aircraft carriers, and intervention. And we have been favoring clearly the latter and neglecting the former. A second effect is sanctions. The U.S. has an enormous sanctions regime all over the world, which has enormous costs to other people. There was recently a study by a British medical journal that calculated the death toll from U.S. sanctions every year over the last half century has been about 500,000 per year, to a total accumulated death toll of over 20 million just from sanctions alone. But it also comes out of the pockets of American people, because it reduces trade with other countries. I mean, a very dramatic case of this was sanctions against Russia, which did indeed, that was actually a major energy shock. That was the first energy shock. Now the second, of course, is Iran. Now we're seeing a very dramatic effect on living standards, because the result of this war against Iran has been the shutoff of trade with the Persian Gulf, the source of about 20% of world energy, a significant amount of its fertilizer. We already are seeing very substantial increases in fuel prices. Anybody who fills up their car at the gas pump can see this. The next shoe to drop will be food. Food prices will escalate because agriculture is one of the most energy dependent sectors, including because most fertilizers are petroleum based. And so this is going to have major impacts across the board. I think it's extremely likely we'll have a recession because of the war in Iran. And it could be a very deep recession, and who knows, it could result in a depression. I mean, the fact is, the financial sector is very vulnerable because we deregulated the financial sector in the 70s and 80s. It's heavily deregulated. And as a result, you could very well have a breakdown of the financial sector. That is a possibility. We came very close to that in 2008. Perhaps we won't just get close to it this time, but we'll go over the edge. That's always a risk. And so this is going to basically affect people's living standards. And there's a direct connection between the reduction in living standards and military spending in this case. So we should take that very seriously.
I put in World Economic Depression, and the AI overview says the IMF warns that a prolonged war with Iran could trigger a global recession, forecasting 2026 growth to drop to 2% or lower if energy prices stay elevated. Disruptions to oil shipment through the Strait of Hormuz have pushed energy prices higher, threatening to hit net importers with higher inflation and reduced growth to unprecedented levels. It also says that this could go from being a global recession, as you said, to a global depression. Now, if Trump is truly America first, then why would he put America last when it comes to energy security, farm security? Because as you talked about agriculture, remember this is the planting season, and the fertilizer that is needed and the nitrogen that is needed is being held up because they sanctioned Russia, and now the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and then we also have the Baba Mandel Strait that is threatening to be closed, and the Houthis or Ansar Allah is threatening to close off the Red Sea. So if you have, do you have any adult in Washington that can think past the minute and think long and strategically? Because this could be devastating for not just agriculture and for just the average worker, but this could be like a death blow to the American economy.
Yeah, well, your alarm is very justified, I think. And I think that a couple of points I'll make. One is that I don't think there's very much of a conception of the long term in Washington. And it's not just Trump, but I think that's across the board. I studied American history in the 40s. In the 40s, policymakers did a lot of very disastrous things in the 40s, but they did have a conception of the long term. They were planning for years and decades ahead. And you can see that very clearly in how they were working. That's been lost completely. I think in politics, the furthest you see ahead is 2 years to the next congressional election. Maybe if you're really far seeing the next presidential election, and that's it. In the private sector, I think with the rise of financialization, there's a tendency to look to the next quarterly report, if that. In finance, you think in very short term. And that's the essence of the economy now, is finance, no longer industry. And so I think that you've had this loss of the long-term perspective almost completely. And that has major consequences here. In terms of a big question, the $64,000 question, of course, is why did Trump launch this war? And what was motivating him? And I guess an additional question is, to what extent is Trump just a rogue president versus is he just a normal president? Well, in his style, he certainly sounds very rogue. And he says bizarre and unhinged things that are disturbing and violent beyond what a normal president would say, let's put it that way. For example, when he threatened to end Iranian civilization publicly, which sounds like he wanted to kill all 92 million Iranians. Well, no president has ever quite said anything like that before. In terms of his policies, though, I'm not sure what he's doing is that abnormal. He seems to me more like a normal president, in the sense that every president has a need to have their own war since 1945. Every president has to be blooded. And so Trump has decided it's time for him to be blooded and have his own war. and this will be Trump's war. It's going to be a disaster. It's already a disaster. But nevertheless, he saw that the route to presidential greatness, he wanted to be not just a two-term president, but a great president. Somebody comparable to Abraham Lincoln or Franklin Delano Roosevelt, somebody to put on Mount Rushmore. And he decided the best way to do that is to fight and win a war, because the great presidents are war-winning presidents. In general, I think there's a certain tendency among most presidents, there are a few exceptions, to focus on foreign policy. Presidents want to be foreign policy presidents. Domestic policy, to most presidents, is boring, right? It's things like education, healthcare, that's just not very interesting to most presidents. What's exciting is projecting power overseas. And Trump is not unique in that. Trump, I would say, is more just normal in that. I think some political scientists have the theory of what's called the two presidencies. In domestic politics, the president seems like a weakling because he has to deal with two houses of Congress. He has to deal with the need for a supermajority in the Senate. He has to deal with states have their own rights. The courts can intervene. It seems if you're president at the domestic level, sometimes it seems like you can't do nothing. Okay, your hands are tied. But in foreign policy, you're almost a dictator. At least in the short term, you can do any damn thing you want. And so presidents love foreign policy, and they don't even have to operate publicly. If they want to operate secretly, there's always the CIA. You want to start a war, you can do it in secret through the CIA. And if you want to start a public war, you can do that too, for the most part. Rarely does Congress or the courts interfere with that. And so I think Trump, I would see him as more of a normal president, and the fact that he's acting incompetently, that's not unusual either. If you look at the history of the war on terror, the U.S. invasion of Iraq, we had massive incompetence. The corruption, the overt corruption Trump is undertaking, this is a normal feature of American foreign policy. I call it the bakshish factor, using the Arabic word for bribery. There was a study. I'm sorry, I'm talking too much. Do you want to interject?
No, sir. No, sir. Continue on.
All right. There was a study in an economics journal, the Quarterly Journal of Economics, by three very distinguished economists, which looked at actually U.S. covert operations overseas. And they looked at the issue of insider stock trading associated with the covert operations. They looked at four major overthrows: Iran in 53, Guatemala in 54, the Congo in 60-61, and Chile in 73. And they found that in all four of those cases, American companies that had interests in those coups, the bottom line is that the policymakers they found evidence, were using these operations to enrich themselves through the use of classified information to engage in insider stock trading, all right? By using insider information about forthcoming coups to invest in companies that would benefit from those coups, all right? And they did this repeatedly, all right? This is a systemic factor in U.S. foreign policy. This is strictly speaking corruption because it's illegal. It's a violation of the Insider Trading Act. And it's done again and again and again. So Trump did not invent corruption. They did not invent it with regard to national security issues. Again, I would see him as more of a normal president in that respect. So I don't share my friend's sense of Trump being a rogue president. He just seems like an average president.
There was a study given by HUD, and HUD said that, matter of fact, I can pull it up right here. A HUD study says that it estimated, often attributed to this analysis surrounding HUD data, suggests it would take $20 billion annually to eradicate homelessness across America. Why isn't that a priority, but funding Israel is a priority, funding wars are a priority, funding color revolutions are a priority, funding weapons manufacturers and bribing leaders around the world are a priority? I often say this almost on every show. There's an old African proverb that I love to quote. It says, if there is no enemy within, the enemy without can do you no harm. So we see that America goes around the world looking for enemies when she's falling apart at home. How can you justify giving Israel tens of billions of dollars yearly and funding Ukraine to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars, and yet
Right.
you have a population that would only take a fraction of that to alleviate homelessness.
Well, it is true. There's no doubt. Every time you talk about spend $20 million in homelessness, which is trivial compared to what we spend in a lot of these overseas interventions. In Ukraine alone, you're right. We spent, I would guess the total cost is probably in the hundreds of billions at this point. I believe formally it's 150 billion, but if you add to it basically hidden costs like the effect of sanctions, it's in the hundreds of billions. And they don't have money, $20 billion to end homelessness. Well, the question is, well, why not? The answer is we're spending it on overseas interventions. We don't have money for education. We don't have money for healthcare. We have some of the worst healthcare outcomes, and actually the worst probably of any wealthy country in the world. And we don't have the money for that. Well, we do have the money for that. We're just choosing not to spend it in healthcare. We spend it on other things. I like to tell my students that I don't like to moralize about it. I'll leave it for other people to condemn it or not condemn it. They can support it if you like. I'm just stating facts. Clearly, we have the money to fund these things. We just choose not to fund these things. And one of the reasons is we're spending this money on the military. And yes, on Israel too. It has been subsidized heavily since the 1970s. Every year, they've gotten, I believe the average is, if I'm not mistaken, about $3 billion a year, every year, for about 50 years, right? And during the recent war, they've gotten much more than that. And clearly, if you want to account for the money being spent now to war with Iran, it's going to be very substantial indeed, the cost. And so one of the questions is, why does the U.S. have such deference to Israel? There's a lot of reasons for that. There's the Israel lobby, both its Jewish and evangelical Christian components, and that's a very significant factor. But I think there's another reason too, which is that I think that there's an ideology of neoconservatism, which began in the 1970s, that was kind of a hyper pro-military extremism, you might say, that is the dominant ideology of the U.S. foreign policy establishment in both parties. And they tend to look to Israel as a model of what America should be like. The neoconservative idea is to make America more like Israel. And the view of that is that Israel attacks, it does not defend. Israel uses military force over negotiations. Israel takes what it wants through force and never apologizes for it. And that's how America should be in the view of the neoconservatives. And they also have, I think, a sort of idealized, exalted image of Israel's military capabilities. They view Israelis as military supermen who win every battle. They don't, actually. They've had lots of screw-ups, but the neoconservatives tend to, airbrush that aside and ignore that fact. And they just have the image, basically, that the hyper-militarist, hyper-tough Israelis, that's what America should be. And that gives Israel a lot of access. The fact that the Israelis are the smart ones, supposedly. The Israelis are the ones we should learn from. That makes it very easy for them to prevail upon the United States to fund them. So I think that the ideology of neoconservatism and its prominence throughout the foreign policy establishment, and now apparently also in the Trump administration. Trump initially had been very critical of the neoconservatives, but now he seems to be relying upon them. Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, is very much on the neoconservative outlook, frame of mind. And so I think the Iran war is the culmination of a neoconservative ideology that sees Israel as the most natural of America's allies.
Thank you, M. Sparks, for the $2 super chat. But all while they're accepting the neoconservative ideals, they are bankrupting the American empire. Not only are they bankrupting her financially, they're bankrupting her ethnically, morally, politically, and militarily. She has used up her political capital globally with this war. She's used up her, and nations are exiting the dollar. You see, Iran has imposed a counter sanction on the United States by telling every ship you have to pay to come through, and your payments have to be in the Chinese yuan and not the U.S. dollar. And we know that from a few of the people, from Marco Rubio to Senator Lindsey Graham himself, said that when they captured Venezuela's oil and gas reserves, all they needed to do was capture Iran's oil and gas reserves, and they would sit on 33% of the world's oil and gas reserves, which would cement dollar hegemony for the foreseeable future. So with this great gamble, and losing this great gamble, they've used up the political capital. The whole world is looking at them as a pariah state, a rogue state, and no longer can they use human rights, international law, democracy, or anything to mask imperial hubris or imperial policies. So what I'm saying to you is that aren't they losing more trying to push these the Israeli first or the neo cons plans to dominate in every spectrum of life?
Well, one of the things they're doing is they're going to war and losing a war. There's nothing like losing a war to undermine your credibility. That's exactly what's happening. It's undermining American credibility at multiple levels. One of them is that the United States is just not that effective at winning wars, is the message people will get from this. They're being defeated by a country America had no respect for, treated as an inferior country in some respects, and they're beating us. They're beating the pants off of the United States right now is what they're doing. And that's going to be very bad for American credibility. But moreover, there's another lesson here, which is that the major Gulf states all allowed the United States to establish bases on the assumption those bases would protect them. It would make them more secure. And lo and behold, they did the opposite. They opened those countries to attack. The United States could not defend them. They could not shoot down the Iranian missiles, at least not in large enough numbers. And the Gulf states that allied with the United States, that cast their lot with American hegemony, have lost out as a result. Their security has been damaged as a result. The lesson many countries will learn is that aligning with the United States is a negative, not a positive, and will cost us basically allies. It will lead to reduced value in alliance with the United States. I think it will lead to the slow motion unraveling of NATO. I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but I think it will happen gradually. As countries will look to the Gulf and say, gee, if that's what American hegemony does for us, it opens us up to attack. Maybe American hegemony and alliance with the US is a bad idea. That's a logical conclusion that one can draw. And so, one of the things I do want to add as well, by the way, just a side issue, is the issue of legality, is that Trump is doing this without the slightest pretense of legality by attacking a country like this, a country that was doing nothing that reasonably can be called a serious threat to the United States, not an immediate threat, certainly, not an imminent threat. This violates the UN Charter, which forbids aggressive war, all right? It also goes against the principles established at the Nuremberg war crimes trials for the Nazis, which is that, several of the Nazis were tried, convicted, and I believe hanged.
Yes.
For what's called the crime against peace. Okay, plotting an aggressive war is in and of itself considered a crime. Okay, and Germany committed that crime when they invaded Poland in 1939. Well, you could say what Trump has done here is a crime against peace and therefore a criminal act. It's interesting to note that, in doing so, I don't see Trump, though, as that different from other presidents, because most of the wars we have fought since 1945, there have been a couple of exceptions, have been done without approval by the UN Security Council and are therefore aggressive wars, right? And so again, I see Trump as a normal president. By the way, one more point on this is it's illegal under US law as well. Because you read the Constitution, if you actually read the document, it lists international treaties as being among what they call the supreme law of the land. So violating an international treaty is violating the supreme law of the land as defined by the Constitution. It violates the Constitution. The courts, to their profound discredit, have never enforced this, right? But maybe it's about time that this become a domestic political issue, that we will hold presidents to the Constitution and therefore hold them to international treaties, right? And that forbid aggressive war. And so I think I'd like to see this become a political issue. I'd like to see candidates for office raise this as an issue, that we should no longer be willing to tolerate illegal and unconstitutional wars like this.
And also when we're speaking about violation of international law, according to the UN, you're not allowed, or you're not legally supposed to attack them. You're not supposed to attack nations that are threatening you. And also, it is illegal under international law to threaten to bomb or target nuclear facilities. And all of those things we've seen openly stated and then done. And then when Trump was confronted about it, he said, well, I don't recognize international law. I do with whatever in my mind. And so this is what's causing the split. And I want to play for you something from Marjorie Taylor Greene. And then I want to get your opinion on this.
Most Americans are completely against this war because, like you said, the president has made no case for it. We live our ordinary lives and we don't feel threatened by Iran. We don't walk around thinking that in any moment an Iranian ballistic missile is going to land on our head. And I was out there on the front lines for Make America Great Again. And Make America Great Again was supposed to be America first, not Israel first, not any foreign country first, not any foreign people first, but the American people first. Now, as we have seen over 100 little girls killed at a school from a bomb, and I don't know whose bomb it was, but they're dead today because America and Israel attacked Iran. So that's not really good for Iranian women. And our president is saying that the Iranian people are all of a sudden going to topple their regime. Well, I don't think the Iranian people are going to be toppling their regime when they're getting blown apart by the United States and Israel in an unprovoked attack. And yes, it was unprovoked. And Pete Hegseth said this morning, Megan, he said that we didn't start this war. But I hate to argue with the Secretary of the Department of War. America and Israel definitely started this war, and you can't lie that away to the American people. And so, you know how I feel right now? I am irate. I am furious about this. We are nearly $40 trillion in debt. How much is this war going to cost us? We have seen enough of our American troops dead and murdered for foreign countries. And now we've had 4 dead and murdered, just like you said, for Israel and for the Iranian people, not for the American people. And I don't want to see any more dead and murdered. When we have a president of the United States who doesn't think and is convinced he's not going to heaven, what does that mean his decision making is? He already said to the New York Post today that he doesn't care about the polling. He doesn't care about what the American people think, and he may put troops on the ground. He took this is going to be a few-day war, to now it's going to be maybe 4 weeks or more. I want to say, what is happening to the man that I supported? And we're a year in, and we're in another fucking war, and we've got American troops being killed. I think it's time for America to rip the Band-Aid off, and we need to have a serious conversation about what the fuck is happening to this country and who in the hell are these decisions being made for, and who is making these decisions.
Well, that was quite powerful, I thought. That was very powerful. I thought the 4-letter words were fully justified, given what we're talking about here. I have to say that, I suspect I and Marjorie Taylor Greene would not agree on a lot of things, but it took some real moral fiber, I would say, to make a speech like that. I don't know. What do you think of it?
I think that she felt betrayed. She put a lot of trust in Trump. She believed in his rhetoric, and that's what happens when you start idolizing or start a cult of personality worship, and they let you down. And I believe a lot of people became a cult of personality worshiper, and they started because they wanted somebody to speak towards their issues, and he spoke toward their issues, and then he turned around and gave them the finger 3 times over. And I think when they realized that, a lot of people, especially her, and they're losing it, because anything that you say in opposition to him, even his own backers, his strongest backers, he then dismisses you, and then he goes on a tirade or a rant about you not being a true follower or a true MAGA. And I mean, it is like 2 little messy school kids fighting over right and wrong. And it seems like to me that he has touched the nerve in the people who truly believed that he would drain the swamp, and they didn't realize that if they would have checked his history, he was a alligator in the swamp long ago in the casinos with Roy Cohn and all of the rest of them. So that's my opinion on it. What is your opinion? Do you have any thing to elaborate on what I just said?
Well, Trump's an interesting character. I think if you listen to his style, one of his appeals, I think, is he's a very blue collar kind of working class style. He's not working class at all. We all know that he's extremely wealthy, but he speaks. First of all, he's very unfiltered, and I think people like that. All right, they saw that as honest. I think politics had emerged, especially in the Democratic Party, to being an extended focus group. Everybody sounded so over-prepared and focus grouped. It sounded like they didn't believe a word they were saying. There are a few exceptions to that. Bernie Sanders did stand out because he had conviction. That was unusual. Most Democratic candidates sound like they have no conviction. They have no real ideas of their own. Trump broke the mold in that, and he just said whatever came to his mind. He didn't care how outrageous it was. He seemed to enjoy the outrageousness. I think people saw that as honesty. And also, he didn't speak. There is a kind of an elitist style that has emerged in the Democratic Party, trying to imitate, you might say, not just academia, but the worst of academia. And I think there's a bit of a class split in the United States, and the culture of the Democratic Party, and it was seen as increasingly elitist. And Trump's style seemed to be a rebellion against that. This is style over substance, however, all right? And people were listening to Trump and thinking, if it has a kind of style, he's someone I can trust. And again, you're quite right. Obviously, if you look at his background and his business background, he's one of the most dishonest people you could imagine. And you wouldn't trust him for anything. But I think people, many working class people, like I said, I think thought, well, they give him a try, all right? And it reflects, I think, above all, the weakness of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party was just so incredibly weak. And it was ossified. It was dried out. It really had very few really effective candidates. You may disagree, but I thought Hillary Clinton, Joseph Biden, and Harris were all very weak candidates at many different levels.
What?
The proof of the pudding is in the eating. They should have been able to defeat Trump easily. And the fact that they didn't defeat Trump easily, and in two cases lost to Trump, and underscores the fact that the Democrats have serious problems. I think that the subject of Trump is a complicated one. At an emotional level, I suppose I understand where people are coming from who vote for him, and why someone like Marjorie Taylor Greene could have been duped by him. And she was duped, and she admits that. All right. What I'm saying also, and I think this is a very interesting development, is that I'm old enough to remember the Cold War. And during the Cold War, if you were anti-war, if you spoke against war, you were on the left. There was no question about it. You were absolutely positively on the left. Now I think there's a very strong anti-war movement on the right. And there are many right-wingers who are adopting a lot of the arguments and even some of the styles of what had been very popular on the left before. You are getting a bit of a breakdown of ideological categories here that is new to me, and especially in foreign policy. Criticism of Israel now, that's becoming very common on the right. And again, Marjorie Taylor Greene is only one example. Polls show this too. And so I think basically Trump used the rhetoric of anti-war up to a point, and that's one of the reasons he won the election, right? But I think now you're going to see a real massive split in the MAGA movement. And as this war continues, and Trump is so foolish to be continuing a war that he's losing, but that's what he's doing, this is going to split the movement right down the middle and lead to a lot more turmoil in American politics, because you had this movement that is now breaking up. And who knows where it's going to go. We're going for a realignment in American politics. We're going for a realignment globally as U.S. power declines. And we're going for a realignment as the mainstream of both parties are being discredited.
Dave 5947, I'm going to bring your comment back up in just a second because I think it's a real good comment. But I want to play a clip because we're already on this matter of what the professor is talking about. And I want you to give me your, because we just heard Marjorie Taylor. Now we're going to hear Tucker Carlson, okay? And I want you to hear what he has to say about Trump at this moment. Remember, these are some of the people who helped promote Trump and help push him to become president. So I want you to listen to this.
Be nothing like it. Open the effing straight. How dare you speak that way on Easter morning to the country? Who do you think you are? You're tweeting out the F word on Easter morning? You'll be living in hell, as if hell is a place. Hell is a condition, and this is an example of that condition. Just watch. Praise be to Allah. You're mocking the religion of Iran. Okay. If you seek a religious war, that's a good idea. The message of all faith At the biggest picture level is the message in our Bible, which is you are not God. And only if you think you are do you talk this way. This is a mockery not just of Islam, it's a mockery of Christianity. To send out a tweet with the F word on Easter morning promising the murder of civilians and then saying praise be to Allah without explaining any of it, you are mocking me and every other Christian because we're Christians. We can't support that.
Well, interesting. Well, I suppose what I'm seeing also, this is another example of what I would call a realignment. If you listen to Tucker Carlson, let me say there are a lot of things about Tucker Carlson I find disturbing, and this is no way an endorsement of Tucker Carlson. But he's turned in a very strongly anti-war direction, very consistently anti-war, and he's been moving in that direction for a number of years now. Also, another thing about him that's quite interesting is he seems very hostile to the Central Intelligence Agency and FBI. And traditionally, those were positions of the left. But now we're getting a man like Tucker Carlson. You know, I'm old enough to remember in 1975, the Senate held hearings under Senator Frank Church, the Church Committee hearings on the CIA, that exposed all sorts of horror stories, CIA's assassinating leaders, engaging in overthrows of governments, illegal propaganda, all these things. And I remember that Senator Church was a hero on the left, but now the only time I ever heard Church invoked in a positive way was by Tucker Carlson. He said, we need a new Frank Church, is what he said. And, so I think we're seeing a real shifting of the ideological sands under our feet. And people like Green and Carlson are good examples of how the old definitions of left and right, I think, really are breaking down to some extent.
And here's another one of Trump's former supporters and backers and campaign people who rallied for him at campaigns. This is Megyn Kelly, and this is what she had to say.
As of this broadcast, the Strait of Hormuz is still closed, and President Trump this morning on Truth Social was not mincing words. Now, as you can imagine, that post did not go over well with the Iranians or with many Americans. I mean, I don't know about you, but I am sick of this shit. Can't he just behave like a normal human? I mean, honestly, like the president, 3D chess, shut up about that shit. You don't threaten to wipe out an entire civilization. We're talking about civilians just casually in a social media post. This is completely irresponsible and disgusting. This is wrong. He should not be doing it. I don't care that it's his negotiation tactic is to kill an entire country full of civilians, men, women, and children, so that the Strait of Hormuz will be opened. It's just wrong.
Do you agree with Megyn Kelly? Comment below.
She's angry. That's a fair statement. She's mad as hell. No, can't say I blame her. They're good clips, all three of them. They're very effective clips. They convey a lot, I think.
So
a lot about where we are quickly.
So that's the base. That's his base, and his base is splintering and cracking right now. And he's lashing out at his base over his policies, and he's saying that his base is to blame and not his policy. Do you think that he is compromised that bad in the Epstein files, because if we look at everything and then we look at who's calling the shots, remember in the negotiations, everybody is saying that during the negotiations in Pakistan that Vance was calling Netanyahu, advising Netanyahu, and he was saying yay or nay on the matters as if he was the president of the United States. Do you believe that they have him that compromised where he's willing to start a regional, where he's already started a regional war, but that could potentially go global to hide some of the things that he's been accused of?
Hard to say. I mean, there certainly has been a lot of speculation. I think some degree reasonable speculation that there are things between him and Epstein that are still have not seen the light of day. He's not released all the files. Clearly, he had a relationship with Epstein, a close relationship. The key question is, to what extent is there, blackmail information associated with Epstein? Perhaps videos of him, who knows, having illegal sex with girls, underage girls. After all, that is what Epstein became famous for, is it not? And so the question is he being blackmailed by the Israelis, by maybe someone else, who knows? I don't know the answer to that. As a general point, the Epstein affair has been very damaging to Trump. The fact that he ran on the idea of releasing all the files and then refused to release the files and then said it's a democratic conspiracy or something like that. That did not go well with his base even before the war. And it may very well have been a factor in his decision to go to war as a means of distraction. I don't think that was the only reason or the main reason. It may have been a contributing factor. And who knows, as I said, there may be blackmail out there. We just don't know. I'm reluctant to speculate beyond that because I just don't have the information.
Dave 5947, as I told you that we would come back to you. Dave has a question for you, Professor, and he says, what does Trump hope to achieve by visiting China?
Well, a lot of it is just to look like a great president who deals with great powers like China. I think part of it is that. Part of it perhaps is to see if he can negotiate some kind of trade and oil deal that will be advantageous to the United States and be able to hold oil domination over the heads of the Chinese and force some kind of concessions basically on things like Chinese exports to the United States. Perhaps he's going to try and convince the Chinese to act against Iran, act against Russia. I don't think he's going to get anywhere with the Chinese because he's playing from a losing hand. He's just started a war, he's losing. And why would the Chinese want to defer to somebody who's losing a war? It defies comprehension. The Chinese will be hurt by this war because they're very oil dependent. They depend on the Persian Gulf for a lot of their oil. On the other hand, they have a very close relationship with Russia, and Russia is an oil exporter. And so the country that will make out very well from this clearly will be Russia. And they will do very well from this war, and I'm sure already doing very well. But I don't think that at this point, Trump can really expect any concessions at all from the Chinese because they hold the upper hand.
China is actually 84% energy secure. They produce 84% of their energy, which shocks a lot of people. I talked to a few people. I couldn't hear you.
Well, yeah, they've been at the forefront of renewables. They've been one of the most countries in the world with regard to solar power. They have some nuclear. I don't think it's anywhere near 84%. To the best of my knowledge, they have no significant or no major internal supplies of oil or gas. So they found two. They have a lot of coal. What's that? I'm sorry.
They discovered two huge oil fields that they are pumping oil from now, and also like a lot of their cars are EVs now on the road. A lot of their things work like that, and they have opened up two pipelines that goes right across the border to Russia. Russia is also shipping liquefied gas and oil through Russian waters into Chinese waters because they border each other. So China will not be as hit hard by this because remember that the stands, those nations with the last name stand, all of those in Central Asia, China could also go use pipelines through there and get oil and gas from there also. So, and this is one of the major reasons why America is trying to destabilize that region. But Russia, when we look at the situation, Trump tells China they better not send weapons to Iran, which this is a sign and a great example of imperial hubris. They demand that China do something, not do something that they themselves do when they send weapons, ship weapons, and cooperate in war games with Taiwan, when they destabilize regions around the world, and then they demand Russia not to send weapons to Iran while they're sending weapons, and they openly admit to sending weapons, training, and intelligence to the Ukrainians. I mean, isn't this showing the world the U.S. hypocrisy and how openly hypocritical the U.S. and Western empires are? Because remember, they screamed about Russia defending itself against NATO in Ukraine, and yet they said Europe said little to nothing about attacks on nuclear power plants in Iran and the targeting of civilian infrastructure in Lebanon, Palestine, Iraq, and in Iran.
Well, there's no doubt that hypocrisy is the name of the game here. I mean, beginning with the fact that U.S. objections to Iranian enrichment of uranium ignores the fact that Israel already has had nuclear weapons for 50 years, actually close to 60 years, I believe. The United States has long been, a major nuclear power. We invented nuclear weapons, literally. And we're complaining about Iran enriching uranium without even developing a bomb. And somehow or another, that seems like the ultimate double standard. I think everyone in the world sees that as a double standard. And you're right, there are all sorts of other double standards. I think until now, the United States is engaged in these double standards that presented, we are, as Tony Blinken liked to say, a rules-based, part of the rules-based order, all right? That was a myth. That was always a myth. That was always nonsense. I think Trump's innovation is to simply disregard old pretenses. As he said, he doesn't obey international law. He doesn't obey any international standards. He has no need for consistency. He has no problem with hypocrisy. So there's a certain shamelessness to him. But I think the shamelessness is the only real innovation. I think the policy, as I said, is kind of a normal policy in a lot of ways.
Could it also be because his bluntness is because the empire is running out of time? When we look at her being the greatest debtor nation in the history of the world, we look at nations now openly challenging her, from small to large, openly challenging her politically, geopolitically, and economically. And we look at the United States no longer having an industrial base, a viable industrial base, no longer having a viable manufacturing base, and has become a service economy. And the empire has to rely on more debt projection. Couldn't this be him lashing out in the last hurrah of American hegemony?
Yes, I think that's exactly what it is. It's a lashing out. It's a recognition of U.S. decline. Let me say, by the way, I think the war in Ukraine also was that. It was a recognition by Biden, I think, that the United States was in maybe terminal decline. And provoking the war in Ukraine, and the U.S. did indeed provoke the war in Ukraine. We provoked the invasion. We did it very consciously. We blocked all negotiation possibilities that existed. That process was also an effort, you might say kind of a Hail Mary pass in a certain sense of the term, to preserve American hegemony. In Ukraine, I think the plan was to destroy the Russian economy through sanctions and to knock it out of the league as the great powers, to deprive China of an ally and to do a shot across the bow to China. That if we can do this to Russia, we can do this to you too. And thereby to get a new lease on life for American hegemony. That's failed disastrously because though it's taking a long time, Russia will inevitably win this war. There's no way Russia can lose. I'll give some reasons for that if people want me to go into details on that. As to why I think that. Okay, well, I'll be very specific about it. If you look at how much Russia is spending on the war, it's not really that much. The percentage of its GDP being spent on its whole military was recently estimated by the Carnegie Endowment at 7.5% of its GDP. That's very low for a country at war. In Vietnam and Korea, the U.S. spent more than that. During World War II, we were spending 45% of GDP on the war effort. That's what a serious country at war spends. If Russia is only spending 7.5% of its GDP on the war, they've barely scratched the surface of what they can do. And they can escalate if they really want to and if they need to. And so, we hear, talk about Russia's economy is about to implode, and that's total nonsense. There's nothing in the evidence to suggest that Russia's economy is about to implode. Russia's economy has not really been that strongly taxed by this war, in reality. I think militarily they've lost a lot, but they can replenish it because their economy is still relatively strong. And so I think based on the economic variables alone, I think Russia can outlast the West. And with the Iranian war diverting missiles and weapon systems from Ukraine, this will simply accelerate the Russian victory.
And let us not forget that the Chinese also allowed Russian banks to issue yuan-denominated bonds, and to sit. And this also helped Russia a lot. So this is what I'm saying. I watch your back, you watch my back. America is trying to strategically break China through Venezuela. Notice every nation that she's targeting, they have some kind of relationship, trade-wise or geopolitically with Russia or China. We look at Venezuela. Russia was a friend. China was an investor. Iran was an investor. We look at Syria. Same here. China was going to do infrastructure. Russia was a military patron. We look at Nigeria. America bombed Nigeria and then sent troops into Nigeria. And Nigeria was one of the nations that were one of the first to accept yuan for oil sales. And now we're looking at Iran, which lies at the heart of the West Asian landmass, and it has a north-south corridor that could help Russia in its trade. It sits in the middle of the Belt and Road Initiative, and if America felt that if they could get Venezuela, they could isolate Cuba at the same time, which is a Russian ally, and they could then get to Iran, and they could remake the Middle East safer for Israel to dominate and balkanize these areas. But also they could then completely surround Russia and China with military bases, and to have them really at the barrel of the gun to kind of control Russia's reemergence as a global power, and to control China's rise or stall its rise as a global superpower. Do you think all of those plans are going up in smoke, and do you think that they really thought deeply about the consequences of that?
Most of it is definitely going up in smoke. It's going up in smoke in the Persian Gulf, and you know, the economic effects of this globally will be devastating, but it also will be devastating to American power. You're quite right. The dollar is likely to lose credibility as a currency, and as the dollar loses credibility as a global key currency, the sanctions weapon will become much weaker. The U.S. will not be able to impose sanctions on countries as much, because the dollar won't be a universal currency anymore after a certain amount of time. That process has begun quite clearly, and the unraveling of the dollar as a global currency. And so I think a major instrument of U.S. power is about to be lost. One country I am very worried about is Cuba, because being so close to the United States and so far from Russia and China, Cuba is very vulnerable. I believe Russia has actually managed to successfully break the U.S. blockade and deliver oil to Cuba. How much it's going to do that is an open question, given Russia is fighting its own war, and Cuba is very far away, and resupplying it will be very expensive. This isn't like the Cold War when the Soviet Union could supply Cuba. I'm not sure Russia has that kind of global reach anymore, but I am hopeful that the disaster in Iran will at least divert American attention enough that will prevent Cuba from collapsing. I think there is some real danger of that. That is one area where Rubio may get his way, I'm fearful. And in the meantime, the Cuban people are suffering very heavily from U.S. sanctions right now, and I'm sure it's causing a spike in the death rate in Cuba. And that's something that is very much can be blamed on the Trump administration.
Also, this is a point that most people didn't get, because they don't put this in the newspaper. Before Russia ever broke the blockade, the Chinese had already broken it, and they started to resupply and rearrange Cuba's power grid with a lot of solar energy, and they also brought a lot of food, a lot of medicine, and they have advisors there. And as China was doing that, later on, like a couple of weeks later, Russia broke the embargo, bringing tons and tons of oil. So you have both superpowers working in conjunction with each other to keep Cuba afloat. Which, when we look at it, we could also flip the coin. And I'll say this as one of the last things, and I'll get your opinion on it. When we look at the pressure that is going on with the American, with the wars, how long can America keep it up? She has debt beyond her eyeballs. I want to play this short clip for you, and after that, this is a short clip. I want you to give me your opinion, because we never look at it. We always look at it from how long can Russia maintain, how long can Venezuela or Iran. But what about the greatest debtor nation in the history of the world? How long can she kick the can down the road? And I want you to listen to this.
America can't finance itself anymore. The only way it can do that is by expanding the debt and having to finance that at a low price. If we were truly a booming economy, the strongest in the world, would we need to do that, or would we be paying down everything? Of course, that would be the case. But what's happening here is our debt is hyper ballooning, of course, by design, and our deficits are detonating. Of course, you're not supposed to know that. It's all just part of this thing that's happening here, where you can't get a shred of truth at all from anything, especially this administration. And look, man, I was no fan of the Biden freak show either. But wow, man. And then I don't care what side of the aisle you still are on. It's unfortunate for you if you're on either side. You should be on your own side, on America's side.
So it was cut off right before, but he was talking about how the debt burden was so great that it would be catastrophic. And I talk to him all the time. I literally on the phone with him. And he said that the situation in the bond market is outrageous. And he said that there are quadrillions, not trillions, but quadrillions in bets in the derivative market. And he said that when this bond market collapses, it will be tantamount to a nuclear exchange, and it will cause massive loss of life because people will lose everything, and when people lose everything, they will just lose it. What do you say? See, as we talk about, can Venezuela or can Iran maintain or can Cuba maintain? Can America maintain when everybody is challenging dollar hegemony?
Well, the U.S. has been a deficit country on its trade since 1971 in most years, and the deficit has tended to go up over time. And the way the United States has dealt with it is it's used its unique privilege of having the world's key currency, the dollar, to encourage countries to buy U.S. Treasury bonds to finance the debt. And that's been happening for over half a century. And it's there's been more and more U.S. debt, foreign debt, owing to this foreign purchasing of Treasury bonds as a way of keeping the U.S. afloat. And it's a way of financing things like hundreds of overseas bases, for example. That's one of the reasons the U.S. can have hundreds of overseas bases. That's one of the reasons the United States can have fleets around the world, is foreign purchasing of U.S. Treasury bonds. The problem is that may be coming to an end as America loses financial credibility. Losing a war politically costs American political credibility, and that could very well cause countries to shift out of U.S. Treasury bonds over time and to stop using the dollar in transactions. And overall, we're starting to see that, and Iran, again, is accelerating that process. Again, America's political credibility and its financial credibility are closely interlinked, and we're about to have a major loss of confidence in both areas. And that's going to make it much more difficult for the United States to finance overseas bases and overseas wars. I'm not sure it's going to be a terrible thing necessarily, at least in the long term, for the U.S. public, because the strong dollar promotes financialization in the United States, and that denudes industry and denudes like high-paying union jobs. We've been seeing that over half a century. So I don't know if this has been good for the American public. It's been good for American power projection and American power. And it's been good for things like the financial industry. And they're going to suffer, if you want to use the word suffer here. I don't know if that's the right word. But what you will be seeing, I think, is a decline of U.S. financial power in coming years. That is quite true. And the U.S. is going to have to face up to the fact that it's simply a debtor country. It is a country with a big deficit on its trade. And it's not going to be financed by foreigners after a certain amount of time.
And would that mark the end of American military hegemony around the world?
Basically, the short answer is yes. I don't think it'll necessarily happen immediately, but it's going to start unraveling. And it's unraveling right now before our eyes. And how long it'll take, I can't say. But it could happen basically within a few years. It could happen within a few years. And that's going to be much more difficult for the United States to present itself as a world power. We won't be able to finance it. And the sanctions weapon will be less useful to us. And in my view, that'll be a good thing. The world will be more stable. It'll be good for the American public. And so I think basically having American power overseas undermined is not something to be mourned. It's to be it's to be faced and possibly even celebrated.
Thank you so much, Professor, for joining me on the Red Pill Diaries. Once again, I really, really appreciate you accepting the invitation and coming on and giving us your thoughts.
Yes.
I'll send you the video in a few minutes. If you have anything to say to the people.
Well, I think that basically what we need to have is anti-war movement in this country, a real, authentic anti-war movement, including an anti-nuclear weapons movement, something we haven't had in a long time. And we should basically set aside ideological labels. And, people on the left are going to join people like Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene on this issue. You don't have to support them on everything, okay? You don't have to like them on everything. But I think people on the left should be able to work with people on the right who oppose war and militarism. And, if we can get a real mass movement, we can use the power of democracy and the power of numbers to oppose these policies.
Thank you so much for joining us again on the Red Pill Diaries. I want you to be safe and be blessed. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Everybody listen. At 3:30 CST, we'll have John Helmer on the platform. I want to take the time out now to say this, as I always say, and you see we're trying a new platform outside of StreamYard. So I want you guys to tell me how you like this platform or whatever, and I'm navigating it. But I want you to do right by others, not because there's some material gain to be had or because of some accolade, but I want you to do right by others because it's the right, the humane, and the godly thing to do. Because even when no one else is watching you, remember that God Almighty is watching you. As my late, great, and beautiful mother would always say, God sits high on the throne of power, but he looks low at the actions of man. Know that I love each and every one of you who loves truth, but know that the love that I have for you will always pale in comparison to the love that the divine supreme being of freedom, justice, and equality has for you. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, remember to stay righteous. Hey, mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Thank you, everybody. Deuces. We're out of here.
Told you to walk away. That was my first and last.